Tantor Audio, a division of Recorded Books, presents Wolf Stockburn, Railroad Detective, by Max O'Hara. Narrated by A.T. Chandler. Chapter 1. If you were a bird flying overhead, your spirits would soar as in your keen raptor's mind you'd anticipate the carnage that would soon paint the sage and buffalo grass, the blood and viscera upon which you would soon be feasting. Beneath you, the long, dark caterpillar of a train trundles over the gently rolling, fawn-colored land from the east. The caterpillar's stout head is the coal-black Baldwin locomotive trailing a plume of smoke from its diamond-shaped stack, a long, ragged guidon tearing and tattering as it thins out over the passenger, freight, and express cars abutted at the far end by the red caboose. The smoke that isn't blown away on the wind snakes its way into the passenger car windows, open against the broiling air rife with the smell of sweat, tobacco, babies' urine, and unwashed bodies. You hear the constant, monotonous chugga-chugga-chugga of the straining engine with a hellish conflagration burning in its stout black belly, converting steam to motion as the large iron wheels grind and clatter over the seams of the quicksilver-bright iron rails. Occasionally the whistle lifts its signature wail, mostly where farm and ranch trails cross the tracks, but just as often when the engineer, bored and heady with his authority and the heft and power under his command, simply pulls the chain to hear himself roar. A small dust plume appears on the prairie, maybe a mile away as you fly straight south of the tracks. Slightly ahead of the plume, a horse and rider take shape. The man rides low in the saddle, leaning so far forward that his chin is nearly resting on his horse's paw. The wind blows the flaps of his duster straight back behind him, whipping them violently. It bastes the front brim of his hat flat against his forehead. The horse fairly flies across the prairie, its own head down, ears laid flat. The beast lunges forward with its front hooves, grabbing at the ground, hurling itself ahead with its back feet. Dust and gravel and small tufts of sod are torn out of the earth by the scissoring shod feet and flung behind with the dust. Horse and rider are racing toward the train, or rather toward the spot ahead of the train where the rider hopes to intersect it. He's not the only one. As you dip and bank and turn your head, losing your ratcheting cry, the blood quickening through your predatorial heart, you see another rider, then another, and another, and another, all racing toward the train. They're spaced between 40 and 60 yards apart in nearly a complete circle around the train. All are racing toward the same spot on the tracks ahead of the chugging locomotive, 20 or more horse and rider spokes converging on the hub of a wagon wheel, which is the railroad line. A great roar assaults the air. You feel the concussion of the blast against your own delicate feathered body and begin to bank away from the threatening sound before your innate curiosity brings you back. You see the black stitched crimson ball of flames rising from the tracks maybe 50 yards ahead of the train at the point toward which the riders are converging. The blast rips the tracks and ties out of the ballasted rail bed and flings them upward in a great cloud of churning dust and gravel. Almost immediately the engineer pulls the chain to set the brakes, which grind and scream as they assault the wheels. The car couplings thunder as the locomotive is thrust back against the tender car, and the tender car is thrust back against the freight car, and the freight car is thrust back against the first passenger car, and on until the locomotive and all the cars screech to a stop on the tracks only a few feet from where the blasted rails lay twisted and charred around the large crater gouged by the dynamite. As the last bits of gravel thump back onto the ground and the smoke from the blast is blown away on the wind, a pregnant silence settles over and around the train, like that which precedes a cyclone. It's short-lived. The growing thunder of galloping hooves replaces it. A man sticks his head out of one of the open train windows and points toward the riders converging on the train in front of their own tawny dust clouds. "It's them!" the man screams shrilly. "It's the devil's horde!" Inside the passenger car, a woman screams. Men shout. They curse. A woman sobs, a baby wails. A great commotion begins inside the car, and you can hear the rumbling with your keen hearing. Up where you were soaring on thermals, the wind rippling your sunshine-burnished feathers, you can distinguish the scrambling sounds inside the car from the thunder of the galloping riders. Several guns are aimed out of the passenger car windows. In the locomotive, the engineer and the firemen have armed themselves as well. Guns bark and pop, smoke puffs in the coach windows and from both sides of the locomotive. The riders converge on the train. They whoop and yip like coyotes as they aim their own rifles and pistols and return fire on the locomotive and on the two passenger coaches. Some of the riders check their sweat-lathered mounts down to skidding halts and leap out of their saddles. They drop to their knees and aim their rifles from their shoulders, picking out targets on the train. They fire, whooping and yelling and pumping their rifles as the empty casings arc up and over their shoulders to flash in the sun before landing in the wild rye and brome grass. Bullets blast out of the windows and the passengers scream. 4 riders leap from their saddles and run to the express car. 2 duck under it, each carrying a burlap bag. The other 2 riders fire rifles at the express car's sliding door while shouts resound from within the car. A man dressed in the blue wool coat and leather-billed cap of a conductor, a gold watch chain drooping against his vest, fires a pistol from the first passenger car's front vestibule. He triggers only 2 rounds before bullets punch into him from front and back, jerking him wildly. He drops to his knees and rolls gracelessly down the vestibule steps to the ground, where 2 of the attackers each trigger another round into him. 4 of the attackers run into both passenger coaches, 2 for each car, one entering by the front, the other by the back. Each is holding an empty burlap sack. They bellow commands and shoot their guns, and more passengers wail and scream and shout curses. In a little over a minute, the attackers emerge from the passenger cars, whooping and howling even more loudly. Their bags have grown larger and heavier. Another loud blast assaults you, pressing your feathers up taut against your slender body. The express car door has been blown open, and into the rolling black smoke 3 of the attackers run, also carrying bags. A passenger stumbles out onto the second passenger car's rear vestibule. He walks as though drunk. He is slender and he wears a gaudy checked suit. He is bald, and his rimless glasses hang by a single bow from one ear. He stumbles off the last vestibule step and falls to the ground. He scrambles to his feet, wails, "Don't kill me," and runs straight out away from the train. There is so much smoke, and the attackers are so distracted by their plunder that they don't see the running man. Laughing together, 2 attackers stumble out of the dining car, each holding a bag in which whiskey and wine bottles clank together. One sees the suited man fleeing to the north, running shamble-footed and almost falling with every 3rd or 4th step. "Hey, look there, Bryce." "Ha!" Bryce sets his bag on the ground, then straightens, palming his pistol. "You want to take him or should I?" "Go ahead, but if you miss, you owe me $10. Bryce curses and, grinning, raises his pistol. "If I get him with my first shot, you owe me 20. He fires. The bullet furrows the prairie grass well ahead and to one side of the fleeing man. The man howls, stumbles, and nearly falls before he gets his feet set beneath him again and continues running. Bryce curses. The other man mocks him and raises his revolver. He fires. That bullet also misses, blowing up bits of a prickly pear just off the running man's left heel. Another attacker, hefting a bag he carried out of the express car, steps up in front of Bryce and the other man. He raises his short-barreled Winchester rifle, cocks, aims, and fires it one-handed at the running man. The bullet drills the running man in the back of the neck. His arms fly up as he falls forward to lie unmoving in the tall grass. The man who shot the fleeing passenger turns to the other 2 attackers, showing his teeth like a vicious dog. "Now will you 2 blanket heads get mounted and ride the hell out of here?" They mutter and grumble, and then both jog out to where their horses are milling, ground reined about 50 feet out from the train, grazing or looking around at the carnage and switching their tails. More of the attackers leap down from the train and jog out to their horses. The train itself is quiet now, though the express car is still smoldering after the explosion. 4 passengers lie on the ground outside the passenger cars, blown out of the windows when the attackers stormed onto the train. One stout old woman in a black sweater and dangling poke bonnet hangs out the window, half in, half out of a passenger car. A bullet hole pocks her forehead. The train's engineer lies slumped over the side of the locomotive, arms and gloved hands drooping toward the ground. The iron housing of the locomotive around him is smeared with his brains and blood, the result of the bullet that smashed into the back of his head and exited through his left eye. The fireman lies at the engineer's feet, writhing in unbearable pain from the bullets that invaded his body. He will be dead soon. Quietly, he prays for his soul, hoping that when he dies, his beloved mother, dead these 30 years, will be awaiting him at the pearly gates, as she'd promised on her deathbed. One of the train's 2 brakemen is running to the west between the tracks. He is sobbing and limping, for he carries a bullet in his right leg. He has several more bullets in his chest and belly, but the adrenaline spawned by fear drives him forward, awkwardly hopping the ties. From inside one of the passenger cars, you indifferently note the regular screams of a woman. "My baby!" she cries. "My baby, my baby, my baby!" The attackers flee, retracing the spokes of the wheel away from the hub and toward all points along the horizon. One of them, heading off to the west, shoots the brakeman in the back twice without his horse even breaking stride. The brakeman screams and falls. The rider continues riding past him, whooping victoriously and pulling his dust plume along behind him. The others do the same. They're gone as fast as they appeared. Behind them, the express car smolders. The young mother continues to scream with metronomic regularity. "My baby! My baby! My baby!" You voice your own ratcheting cry of delight, lower a wing, and swoop downward. If you hurry, you'll beat the buzzards. Chapter 2. Wolf Stockburn rode his rangy, smoky gray stallion up to the stone well and swung his lean, long-legged frame down from his saddle. He spied movement in the corner of his left eye, but did not turn his head in that direction. No stranger to ambush, he knew the best way to trigger a bushwhack was to let the bushwhacker know he, or they, had been spotted. The stallion gave a low whicker of warning. "Easy, Smoke," Wolf whispered, patting the big beast's wither reassuringly. "I saw it." Calmly, he dropped the bucket into the well. It landed with a wooden thud and a splash that echoed up out of the stone-lined chasm. He winched the bucket up out of the well. Water slopped down the sides and made mud of the straw-flecked dust around the soles of his low-heeled black boots. As was the case with most legendary men, Stockburn had been tagged with several nicknames over the years. One of them was the Gray Wolf. He'd come by the handle honestly, for there was something wolfish in Wolf Stockburn's demeanor. He sported roached hair, coarse as wolf's fur and so gray that it was almost white, and had been since his late 20s. His face was strangely, primitively handsome, with deep-set gray eyes that sometimes appeared a faded blue. V-shaped, strong-jawed, his features were broad through the cheekbones, tapering down to a solid, spade-shaped chin. The predatorial nose was long. Contrasting sharply with the man's short gray hair and trimmed gray mustache and sideburns, his features were weathered and sun-bronzed. Stockburn was a big man, over 6 feet tall, all gristle and bone, customarily clad in a finely tailored 3-piece suit with a long black frock coat, white silk shirt with upraised collar, black foulard tie, gray striped black vest, and black cotton trousers. Owning the primitive senses of his Scottish warrior ancestors, Wolf's perceptions were keenly alert as he ladled up some water for himself. As he drank, he peered furtively up from beneath the severe ridge of his gray brows and the broad brim of his low-crowned black sombrero, directing his gaze in the direction of a small barn hunched on the yard's northwest edge. When he had had his fill of the cold water, he stepped up in front of the stallion and set the bucket down so the horse could drink. He'd no sooner removed his hand from the bucket's rope handle than he spied movement again off the barn's far corner. The horse had seen it too. Smoke whinnied shrilly. Lightning quick, one of Stockburn's 2 single-action Colt Army .45 caliber peacemakers was out of its holster and clenched in his right hand. He swung hard right, raising and cocking the nickel-plated ivory-gripped piece and fired. His bullet struck the barrel of the rifle aimed at him from around the corner of the barn. The clang of lead on steel reverberated shrilly. The rifleman screamed and staggered away from the barn as he dropped the rifle, then lowered his right hand toward the holster on his right hip. Again, Stockburn's .45 roared. The bullet tore through the short, thick-waisted rifleman's hickory shirt, blowing dust and punching the man backward into a large cottonwood. The man's high-crowned black hat, trimmed with an eagle feather, bounded off his shoulder before tumbling to the ground. Glimpsing more furtive movement to his left, Stockburn whipped his tall cavalryman's body back that way, aiming the peacemaker at the sprawling brush-roofed log shack sitting 40 yards to the north. Another rifle barrel bristled from behind the shack's partly open door. Stockburn's Colt spoke 2 more times, flames lapping from the barrel. As the thundering reports chased each other's echoes skyward, both bullets punched through the crude plank-board door. The man's muffled wail sounded from behind the door. There was a thump as the would-be shooter's rifle struck the shack's wooden floor. Then the door lurched open as the rifleman fell forward onto his face. He lay half in, half out of the shack, the bullet-scarred door propped open by his right shoulder. Another gun thundered. This one had been triggered from inside the shack. A man yowled. A body flew out the large window to the right of the open door. The flying man wailed again as glass rained around him. His 2 long black braids whipping around him like miniature wings, he landed with a grunt and a loud thud in the dirt fronting the shack. The double-barreled shotgun he'd been holding clattered onto the ground beside him. He writhed and groaned for a moment, gave another grunt, then relaxed with a final sigh. Silence, save for Smoke's uneasy whickering. Boots thumped inside the shack. The sounds grew louder until a comely female figure clad in men's rough trail garb appeared in the half-open doorway. "Damn," she trilled, looking at the glass spilled around the dead man with the braids. "I just replaced that window last week." She turned her Indian dark face with a patch over one eye toward Stockburn. Her good eye flashed wickedly. "Look what you made me do, Wolf." "I do apologize, Comanche." Stockburn scowled at the broken-out window. "A right fine window, too. Leastways it was. Did you ship that all the way out here from Bismarck?" "Where else?" asked the pretty half-breed Comanche in her late 30s, early 40s. A lady didn't go around announcing her age, as she towed the broken glass with one of her high-topped beaded moccasins. "Look at that." I know, Stockburn said. "Every time I ride out here, you end up costing me money." "Well," Wolf shrugged, casting the woman a disarming grin. "I do appreciate you coring Santana for me. If he'd drilled me through that window, it would have cost you twice." The pretty curvaceous woman scowled. "How so?" Stockburn shrugged again. "This way you just have to pay for the window. If Santana had shot me, you'd have to pay to have me buried, or at least wear out a good horse riding to Thornton's Ford to send a telegram to my boss in Kansas City, have him send a wagon for me. Oh, the time and effort involved. This way, you can just drag Santana and his pards, I'm assuming those 2 are Mortimer Freeze and Spike Kane, off to the nearest ravine." Comanche, born Denomi, though she hadn't answered to anything but Comanche since she'd left her white foster parents in Texas many years ago, crossed her arms on her well-filled blouse and tapped a boot toe. "Comanche," Stockburn intoned, "you wouldn't just drag me off to the nearest ravine, would you?" "Let's just say you're fortunate I don't have to make that decision." She paused, glaring at him with her one good coal-black eye, then added for effect, "Yet." A tittering rose west of the main shack. Comanche turned toward the sound of the commotion, then drew her mouth corners down as she said, "I see your admirers have gathered." "I wonder what woke them," Stockburn said ironically, having turned to the three brightly and scantily clad doxies standing on the stoop of the secondary shack sitting about 50 feet to the west of the main one, and back off the yard. It was sheathed in brush and shaded by cottonwoods. Between two cottonwoods hung a clothesline drooping with the weight of ladies' delicate, brightly colored clothes. The sporting girls were milling and smoking, casting their own coquettish gazes toward the tall, handsome man with high-tapered cheeks and deep western tan. In the bright sunlight reflecting off their skimpy clothes and jet-black, copper-red, and gold-blonde hair respectively, they resembled brightly colored birds in their soft pinks, greens, purples, and powder blues. One in particular, the green-eyed blonde, held Stockburn's gaze, broadened her smile, and gave her pink parasol an extra twirl. "What? Or who?" Comanche gave a husky chuckle. "They hear enough gunfire to be deaf to it by now. They heard the wolf of the rails was on his way here on his smoky gray horse, and they've been waiting to feast their eyes on the manly likes of Wells Fargo and Company's senior detective for their railroad division." Stockburn started to blush, a rarity for him, then frowned. "How'd they know?" He glanced at the two dead men. "In fact, come to think of it, how'd Santana know I was headed this way?" "One of their fellow riders of the Long Coulee saw you in Siouxlance and rode out here to alert him and the others. A smelly devil named Bertram." "Ah, Bertram, the wheelwright. That's the one." Comanche had turned to stare at Miguel Santana, the big, thickly built man with two black braids lying in the grass to her right. The one nearest Comanche was Mortimer Freeze. The first man Stockburn had shot over by the barn was Spike Kane, or had been. All three were had-beens now. This bunch, which included the older Hollis Dad Drago, had robbed a stagecoach near Pierre 3 days ago. Stockburn had heard about the robbery when he'd pulled into Fargo on the Northern Pacific, which he'd taken from his company's Northern District office in St. Paul, Minnesota. He'd had no idea he'd find the stage robbers here, but he wasn't surprised. When the outlaw gang made up of Santana, Freeze, Kane, and Dad Drago plied their nasty trade, they usually holed up somewhere in the belly of this vast territory, which was still mostly wild, despite coming off the iron rails and telegraph cables and rumors of imminent statehood. Comanche's ranch, as it was called, though it hadn't been a working ranch in years but a general store, saloon, and brothel, was often a prime hideout for such desperados as Santana's lowly bunch. "They were alerted by the outlaw telegraph, eh?" Stockburn turned to the doxies, still fluttering on the stoop of the second shack. He grinned and pinched his hat brim. "Ladies?" They batted their eyelids and flounced. "Get your eyes off those girls, you rake," Comanche chided the detective good-naturedly. "The oldest is young enough to be your daughter. I, on the other hand—" "Yes, you," Stockburn said, feasting his eyes again. Comanche chuckled. He thought she might have even blushed, though, like himself, he'd never known the half-breed beauty to blush. She jerked her chin toward the shack. "Get in here. I'll buy you a drink." "You know you've never had to ask me twice to drink with you, Comanche." Stockburn returned the Colt Peacemaker to the black leather holster on his left hip. Its twin resided on his right hip. He closed his long black cutaway coat and strode forward, addressing his horse over his shoulder. "Stay, Smoke. I'll give you some oats after you've had your fill from the water bucket." Stockburn rolled the dead man out of the doorway with his boot, then stepped through the door and to one side. He opened his coat with his left hand and closed his right hand over the Peacemaker's grip. "Where's Dad?" "Out of commission." Comanche strode into the room's deep shadows toward the bar at the far end. She shook her hair back from her face, adjusted the patch over her left eye, then set a labeled bottle of Old Kentucky onto the bar. She'd taken the elaborate mahogany bar with a complete back bar and mirror out of the Bismarck saloon one of her former husbands had owned. She'd scavenged the elaborate piece of hand-scrolled and deftly chiseled woodwork when the cork-headed sot had lost the saloon to the bank before the bank had officially taken possession. "He took a bullet to the chest," she said, regarding Dad Drago. "He's dying upstairs. He'll leave the world a better place." "Getting so's a fella can't ride here no more, Comanche, not lessen he wants to risk getting shot just drinking your watered-down whiskey." The speaker was one of 3 men sitting at a table near the room's far wall from which the head of a pronghorn antelope stared down in glassy-eyed contemplation. He was a tall, long-faced, mean-eyed cuss whose right hand was draped over the walnut grips of the Schofield .44 holstered on his right thigh. He'd spoken to Comanche, but his colicky gaze was on Stockburn. Chapter 3. The mean-eyed cuss was the foreman on one of the several sprawling ranches that had been established in the area after the coming of the Northern Pacific only a few years ago. The 2 men with stink eye were punchers from the same operation. Stockburn had seen all 3 before. Dakota Territory might have been sprawling, but its population was modest. While he couldn't remember the trio's names, he could remember that he didn't like any of the 3, but that he liked the foreman least of all. Stink Eye turned his glare on Comanche standing behind the bar, then returned it to Stockburn and flared a nostril. His flat eyes raked the detective up and down from the pointed toes of his black boots to the flat crown of his black felt sombrero. "So, there he is, the big man himself, the Gray Wolf." Newspaper scribblers had started calling Stockburn that a few years ago, when tales of the legendary gray-headed detective's daring do had started making their way beyond the wild western frontier. "If I didn't water down my whiskey, you couldn't afford it, Sorley," Comanche said with casual insolence. "George MacDonald doesn't pay you enough because you're not worth enough. You should be glad he pays you anything at all. Who else but that old English outlaw would hire as his foreman a stone-stupid army deserter and ex-cattle rustler like yourself?" She'd said this smiling insouciantly across the room at Stockburn. The other 2 men with Sorley, Hugh Sorley, Stockburn remembered, snickered. Sorley cowed them both with a look and returned his belligerent gaze to Stockburn. He and the other 2 were playing poker, but Sorley, clad in deer-hide chaps and a cracked leather vest, wasn't looking at the cards in his left hand. His right hand was still draped over the Schofield holstered over his belly. A long, slender cheroot smoldered in an ashtray near his left elbow. An unlabeled bottle sat on the table near a small pile of coins and greenbacks. "He don't look like so damn much to me," Sorley snarled, his gaze still on the railroad detective. "What you see is what you get, partner." The affable smile dwindled on the detective's face, and his gray eyes turned a shade grayer. "Now kindly remove your hand from that old Schofield, or I'll take it away from you and beat you with it." Sorley's eyes, glued to Stockburn's, blazed. The other 2 men smiled, cutting their own gazes quickly between the detective and the ranch foreman. They didn't say anything. Smoke from their cigarettes and Sorley's cheroot thickened around them, lit by the light from the window behind them. Comanche said nothing. She stood behind the bar, hands resting on the mahogany's edge. She too slid her gaze quickly between Stockburn and Sorley, confronting each other like Brahma bulls in the same paddock. The foreman glanced at the twin peacemakers in Stockburn's holsters. The detective's hands hung straight down his sides. Neither hand was near either of his pretty pistols. Still, Sorley looked constricted, hesitant. He was remembering the stories about Stockburn. He was faster than some, but some were faster. The thing about him, though, was that he never lost his edge. In fact, he could be as cold-blooded as anyone who'd ever ridden on either side of the law. And he rarely missed. Sorley might be faster. Might be. Still, his heart was thumping to beat the band. He had a feeling Stockburn's heart was beating at the same rate it had been when he'd first stepped through the door. A single bead of sweat popped out on Sorley's left brow and dribbled down into that eye, burning it. The man winced at the sting, blinked. That seemed to be the deciding factor. That single sweat bead. Sorley removed his right hand from the Schofield's grips, brushed the sweat from his eye.
Sample complete. Ready to continue?